Dear colleagues, I'm very honored to start our event, which is the first of this kind, but I hope not the last one. We will try to introduce this option more frequently in the work of OSCE. Today, we decided to dedicate our virtual roundtable to the collaborationism, a very interesting phenomena which deserves studying in a contemporary world. We were all raised in an environment where Nazism and fascism was an evil. The scourge of war was not an abstract notion, but a recent memory. The perpetrators of these crimes against humanity were obvious and personified. In my country, virtually everyone knew about the tragedies of the Second World War. Memory about it was one of the few shared values that united the countries of the East and the West blocs. Politicians were arguing about modern political behavior. There was a deep ideological divide and rivalry, but events of the recent past were quasi-unanimously viewed through similar optics. No one dared to openly whitewash Nazi criminals or question the outcome of World War II. This could be an end to political career. But from the legal point of view, there are important nuances related to the condemnation of Nazi criminals. The landmark event in this direction, the Nuremberg Tribunal, was unequivocal about German Nazism and key figures from German fascist leadership. However, for a number of reasons, the so-called small Nazism largely escaped such fate. I hope that my colleague from New York, Deputy Permanent Representative of Russia to the UN, Maria Zabolotskaya, who is one of our panelists, a bit later will provide us with more insights on this topic. It didn't change, however, the general public perception that Nazi collaborators share the blame of their big Nazi patrons. This was the case for many years, but recently the situation began to change. A number of players, for different reasons, started to politicize history, squeeze it into their narratives, ignoring obvious historic facts. When I say small Nazism, I primarily have in mind the movements that were clear followers and in many cases cosplayers of German Nazism. Some of them managed to establish their own state, like Romania under dictator Antonescu, or Croatia. Others, like the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists or Baltic Nationalists, were aspiring to build their own state on Nazi-driven ideological platforms. The second category is more numerous and was less unequivocally condemned, leaving a space for speculations, and therefore became the most likely object of revisionism and glorification in a number of countries today. Some of our speakers will address the specific cases during our meeting. However, there is one common trait that unites most of the small Nazism. Like German Nazis, and very often alongside them, they were promoting racial supremacy, xenophobic theories, and involved in genocidal actions against other ethnic groups, which they considered enemies and threats to their race. If we take Ukrainian nationalists, there is a vast evidence of mass atrocities vis-à-vis Poles, Czechs, Jews, Russians, Gypsies and Roma, Ukrainians themselves. They strictly followed the German Nazi rulebook on so-called inferior nations and Untermenschen, applying them to themselves. Quite often the acts that they committed with unimaginable cruelty shocked even German soldiers who themselves had their hands covered in blood. Some might ask a question, why do we devote so much time to history? The answer is simple. This history has a direct bearing on us today. Ukraine is the most obvious example. This country is in vanguard of those who try to rewrite history, to make Nazi collaborators heroes, and to build modern martyrology on them. Colleagues, we will now start the discussion, and I also encourage each and every one of you to be short in their remarks. I recommend for our briefers to speak no longer than 10 minutes, for remarks and comments 3 to 5 minutes. First, I will give the floor for some general remarks to three of our panelists. The first one is Simona Mangiante Papadopoulos, a famous blogger and scholar from Italy. Simona, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Ambassador Polianski. Ladies and gentlemen, so it's a great opportunity to address this important gathering. I will be very short. Over the past several years, through my work as a journalist and documentary interviewer, have spent considerable time examining the political evolution of Ukraine, the broader post-Soviet space, and increasingly contested battle over historical memory in Eastern Europe. In that capacity, I have interviewed political leaders, policymakers, historians, and public figures, including former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko. One of the most consequential developments I have observed is the growing political instrumentalization of history. Across much of Eastern Europe, history is no longer merely subject of academic inquiry. It has become a tool of nation building, geopolitical competition, and identity formation. Since independence, and particularly after 2014, section of Ukrainian political and cultural life have increasingly elevated figures such as Stephen Bandera and Roman Shukevich as symbols of patriotism, resistance, and national sovereignty. However, the historical record demonstrates that organizations associated with these figures remain deeply controversial because of their involvement in ethnic violence, extremist national ideology, and collaborative structures during the Second World War. The result is that memory itself became a contested territory. What concerned me the most is not the excess of historical debate, is rewrite history for political propaganda. And it's something that as a journalist I've witnessed, rewriting of history. We should defend our right to the national memory while also defending the obligation of historic honesty. History should unite us in the pursuit of truth, not divide us through selective remembrance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simona, for these brief remarks. I recommend all the speakers not to rush when they speak, because there is a simultaneous interpretation thanks to our colleagues in Moscow, and interpreters need to have some more time to process what you are saying. The second on my list is my colleague Maria Zabolotskaya. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. First of all, let me thank the mission to the OSCE for organizing this important event. We all know that we are coming to a couple of important dates, one of them being the 80th anniversary of the completion of the trials of the Nuremberg Tribunal, and the second is the 80th anniversary of the start of the Great Patriotic War for Russia. So on upcoming these dates, it is important to remember what happened and how come that today, so many years after, we are still discussing the Nazism, which is raising its head. So I was asked to deal with the, as you call them, small Nazism. I call them minor Nazism. Don't know what's the right word for that. Basically what happened was, as we all know, the Nuremberg Tribunal tried just 24 persons who were, of course, the tip of the iceberg even in Nazi Germany. And after it has completed its work, there were several processes, of course. Some of them were conducted by the United States in the same place, in the same building of Nuremberg. And there were some attempts to continue the work, but of course the Cold War reality didn't allow it to happen. And that's why the whole area of Nazism in Europe somehow stayed outside of the focus of international community. And but I want to emphasize that Nuremberg touched upon those issues. As we know, the Nazi and fascist ideologies were quite popular in Europe, not only in Germany. And so in a number of countries, as you mentioned, there were several movements with different levels of success who either established a state or took other measures to support their Führer, so I should call him. Basically, what were the actions? Mainly, it was two types of actions. They joined the Waffen SS directly, and there were, as we know, a couple of several actually national Waffen SS legions. Basically, most of them came from the Baltic states. There was a Latvian legion, a national military unit of Latvians that fought under German command in World War II. There was a Lithuanian soldiers who gave assistance to German extermination squads. So there were Ukrainians who participated in Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS Galiciana. There were Croats who participated in Waffen Mountain Division of the Hanchar 1st Croatian. So there was the whole plethora of these Waffen SS legions that were supporting Germany, and actually the Nuremberg Tribunal has condemned SS as a criminal organization. When the Nuremberg Tribunal condemned the SS, it actually gave a definition to what SS is, and Waffen SS was part of it. So basically, the legal basis was there to continue the prosecution. But it didn't happen at the international level. And the second way of collaboration with Nazi Germany was, of course, participation in so-called Einsatzgruppen that were committing large-scale executions in the occupied territories, and they were, of course, punishing Jews and Slavs and Gypsies. So they are, of course, as we all know, were very famous for that. And Nuremberg touched upon that issue too. Let me just bring a small quote from the Nuremberg judgment, which says that the effectiveness of the work of Einsatzgruppen is shown by the fact that in February 1942, Heinrich was able to report that Estonia had already been cleared of Jews, that in Riga the number of Jews had been reduced from 29,500 to 2,500. Altogether, the Einsatzgruppen operating in the occupied Baltic states killed over 135,000 Jews in 3 months. So this is the statements from the Nuremberg Tribunal. But what happened was the onset of the Cold War that interrupted the process of denazification, not only in Germany but in Europe. And in the 1940s, 40s, and 50s, yesterday's accomplices in crimes against humanity were suddenly rebranded by Western intelligence agencies as valuable anti-communist assets. And one of the most striking examples is 1950 ruling of the United States Displaced Persons Commission. And I have to explain that, of course, that commission was dealing with displaced persons as a result of World War II, and the majority of them were, of course, victims of Nazism, like Holocaust survivors, forced laborers, and others. However, this category was cynically expanded in order to include, to weaponize and harbor the collaborators in Eastern Europe. And for instance, notwithstanding Nuremberg judgments, the Commission declared that Baltic Waffen SS units were separate and distinct from German SS in purpose and ideology, granting thousands of voluntary collaborators a safe haven and clean slate. So this shifting of moral boundaries were openly articulated in the American media. For instance, in editorial published in America in February 1947, captured new Western consensus regarding displaced persons. and I quote, "They might be Nazis, however, to help them specifically by taking some of them into our country is a concrete challenge to communism." So basically, those collaborators were found very useful in fighting communism. The presence of mass murderers within the displaced persons camps was not an oversight. It was a known fact denounced even from within the United States itself. For instance, Abraham Ducker, a member of the American mission to the Nuremberg Trials Commission, possessed first-hand knowledge of wartime crimes in Eastern and Central Europe, and he warned that camps contained numerous Nazi collaborators and murderers from Baltic states, Ukraine, Croatia, and Slovakia. And he documented that these individuals had voluntarily joined Nazi forces, served them loyally, and their detachments were responsible for the slaughter of thousands of Jews and partisans. And in his critique of the Committee on Displaced Persons decision, he exposed a deliberate disinformation campaign that portrayed all displaced persons uniformly as victims of Nazism. Also another telling example of divergent national approaches to justice can be seen in the trials of Nazi criminals in Germany itself, and the difference between the approaches in GDR and FRG. The Criminal Court of GDR explicitly stated that no statute limitations applied to such crimes. Meanwhile, courts in FRG relied on Criminal Code of 1871. Under this code, if a crime classified as murder without aggravation circumstances, the case could be closed once the statute of limitations expired, and this category was applied cynically to crimes such as burning of villages and killing of hostages, with these arguments that under certain conditions such acts could be permissible as following orders or during military necessity. So in the 1990s, in the already unified Germany, court proceedings were held that questions the sentences previously issued by GDR courts. Some of these processes resulted in the rehabilitation of Nazi criminals. So basically, these minor Nazism in Eastern Europe, they were not prosecuted properly, as it can be seen. There were several attempts by the USSR to bolster that process. There were attempts at the United Nations. There was a resolution put forward on cooperation regarding the prosecution of war criminals, but that resolution was put for a vote, and the Western European states were not supportive of that resolution. We all know that there was a convention on the non-application of statutory limitations to war crimes and crimes against humanity, and that resolution was also not ratified by Western states. So this gap remained and widened, and we are now seeing the consequences of this gap. So I don't know if I should continue. Dmitry, tell me regarding the steps that we are taking now regarding the resolution on combating or glorification of Nazism and other topics that I have to cover, or maybe I should come back to them later.
Thank you. Maybe very shortly, a couple of minutes on this resolution, because this is indeed a very important document and endeavor.
Yes, so as we all know, Nazism is not a historic event and not a historic issue in Europe and in the world, and that's why Russia is putting forward a resolution, an annual resolution, which is called Combating Glorification of Nazism, Neo-Nazism, Racism, Racial Discrimination, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. It's a long title, but it actually, this resolution, when first introduced, was a concise text supported only by Russia, Belarus, and Nicaragua. But today it has grown into a comprehensive indictment of modern historical revisionism, with 43 members co-sponsoring and 119 votes in favor. So this resolution actually is the only document of the UN that expresses deep concern regarding glorification in any form of the Nazi movement, neo-Nazi, and former members of the Waffen-SS organizations, including by erecting monuments and memorials, holding public demonstrations in the name of glorification of Nazi past, the Nazi movement and neo-Nazism, declaring or attempting to declare such members and those who fought against the anti-Hitler coalition, collaborated with Nazi movement and committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, participating in national liberation movements, as well as the renaming of streets and glorifying them. So this resolution covers the whole spectrum of concerns that we are having now regarding the revival of Nazism. This resolution is unfortunately attacked by the Western states. It is attacked on different grounds. Some of them is actually that the one argument was that Waffen-SS was not condemned by Nuremberg Tribunal, and that's why actually I brought some quotes from Nuremberg decisions to show that it's not true. And they are also attacking this resolution on the basis of the freedom of speech. So to call, I mean, it is of course an important right, freedom of speech, but the application of it to Nazi ideology is of course outrageous. But of course we are continuing the work regarding this. And let me then just say very shortly that there is another endeavor that we are now pushing forward. And this endeavor is related to the genocide of peoples of the Soviet Union. I don't know if our international participants and audience is following, but in April last year, there was a law adopted on perpetuation and memorialization of memory of victims of the genocide of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War. So this law established a specific day of memory of the genocide of peoples of the Soviet Union. And actually this year we had the first commemoration of this date. And on this occasion, we have addressed a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations. And actually this letter was circulated as a document of the General Assembly, which actually sets forward the whole picture why we call the crimes against Soviet peoples not only as war crimes or crimes against humanity, but as genocide. And we put forward the focus on actually ethnic origin of these crimes that happened on the territory of Russia and territory of the former Soviet Union. There were specific ethnic goals there. That actually the land of the Soviet Union should be taken from the peoples that are living there and used for the benefit of the superior races like Germans. Then we show in this letter that the hunger and the crimes that committed the mass killings of people in the Soviet Union were not just taking place, you know, in fight against partisans or against for military necessity, but it was a plan. It was a plan of extermination of peoples living on that territory on ethnic basis, in order to take all resources from them and to let them starve to death. And maybe some people would say that this is something new, this is something that was not recognized before. But we are showing that actually all these facts were corroborated by the Nuremberg trials. They were just not branded like genocide, but we see there actually the factual background. And also we have to admit that the historical research is ongoing. And new documents are coming up that are now being processed by historians. And actually, let me just maybe finish by naming one name. And this name is one of the his title was State Secretary in the Reich Ministry of Food and Agriculture. His last name was Bake. So this person actually, which is who is not very well known, I think, by the wider audience, was actually the mastermind of this genocide. And of course, it was on the orders of Adolf Hitler, but he was the mastermind of how to deprive the whole population of the Soviet Union of its resources and let it starve to death. And in this context, we see that the horrific crime of the blockade of Leningrad, which is well known, is just but one episode of this strategy. So let me stop here. I understand that I take a lot of time, and I think that I'm looking forward to the interesting discussion today.
Thank you very much, Maria. Of course, Yen remains our main battlefield for these very important endeavors. I can also update you that we raised the topic of the genocide of Soviet people here in the OSCE, and we were very much shocked by the reaction of our German counterparts, which really tried to deny the fact of such a genocide, to deny the existence of Soviet people. So they were very provoking, and of course it's very telling for the reaction of Germany and for the way this country is now following. I also want to commend you on remembering the phenomenon of former Nazi criminals serving United States and Canada. This phenomenon deserves a separate, very thorough study, and there are a lot of new shocking facts that start to emerge, and I hope that international scholars will analyze them thoroughly. I would like also to give now the floor for general remarks to Austrian historian Elizabeth Hersch. Elizabeth, you have the floor. You need to unmute your mic, Elizabeth.
No, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, please. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, first let me thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for the honor to be here to contribute some thoughts at this distinguished forum. I would like to make some historical remarks very shortly because, as I said, it will not be a conference, just a short comment. From the Ukrainian antagonism and opposition movements up to those of separatism and nationalism with racist elements. So I would like to mention the four main movements historically. First, the Ukrainian antagonism against the Moscow Central Power was already back to the 15th and 17th centuries to the centralism in the period of the creation of the powerful Moscovian state. Those movements were rather political ones, directed against centralism in the form of a government. So this was a political motivation. Ukrainian political combined with nationalistic antagonism ideas was enhanced, if not provoked, by forces abroad out of the Ukraine at the beginning of the 20th century, before and during World War I, by the Austro-Hungarian and German empires. They actively instigated separatist movements by smuggling publications and brochures into the then border regions of the Tsarist Empire, such as Ukraine, Finland, which was at that time a principality of the Russian Empire, and the Caucasus countries, but no, regions, but not the sympathy with the oppressed populations, which was officially named that way, but with the aim of weakening Russia, even to the state that it could break up, that those regions could break up from the main Russian state, which was their hope. And those motivations, it seems, Karzitsa, remain that way up to today. So the motivation not so much for love and friendship to the Ukrainian people, but rather in order to weaken Russia. So this was even part of the systematic plan for the organization of the Russian Revolution, as you can find in documents in the political archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Berlin. And this is where I took those documents for my book about Barbus Helpand, the organizer of the Russian Revolution. So this was already part of the program then, so 100 years ago. Third, the national political motives combined with ideological ones were the reasons why during World War I from 1918 on, shortly after the Lenin's coup d'etat, on the Ukrainian Cossacks within the White Army of former Tsarist officers fought on the side of Germans against the Bolshevik regime, hoping to free Russia from the Red Power. So this was rather an ideological uh, motive. This repeated itself during World War II, as it is generally known, by the same motives, and as it's certainly known, ended not only in the defeat but also in the Cossack tragedy, the famous Cossack tragedy, where tens of thousands of Cossacks were betrayed by the British presumed allies and handed over to Stalin. Now, the ethnic national movement. This comes to sight already in the midst of the 20th century. The OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which was formed and formally established 1929 at the Congress in Vienna, by the way. Then the Ukraine had already become a separate state, republic within the Soviet Union, with defined borders, so including ethnic Russian speaking and other ethnic populations. The OUN soon split into a moderate and militant wing, the later under Stepan Bandera, who justified violence, assimilation, violence, assassination, and murdering of members of non-ethnic Ukrainian populations and of their leaders in order to achieve his aims. In 1941, the moment of the invasion of the German Nazi army, told his best. His philosophy, of course, were united with the philosophy of Nazis to create ethnically homogenic state with a totalitarian leadership. This is what he wanted to do also in his country. He collaborated with them in persecuting Jews and other ethnic members of ethnic minorities, and in the murdering of 60,000 Poles in the West Ukraine, which is documented that way. Some of the UN served in the SS divisions of the Nazis, as it was mentioned, and of course, I'm not the only one who mentions this, but I didn't know exactly what will be said today in this conference. And it is remarkable to me as an Austrian, as a Western European citizen, to see in today's Ukraine glorify Bandera's name, celebrate him in front of his monuments, and all that attending political officials. Now the last movement I want to mention is the Azov group. From there, it was not far from UN. It was not far to the creation of the Azov movement. By the way, it remembers the conquest of the fortress Azov by Peter the Great. So it's quite a high benchmark they put them. Founded in 2014 by Andriy Bieletsky, with an extreme Ukrainian national attitude combined with far-right extremism. So you have the former movements, motives of movements combined with far-right extremism. The way was open to the political cleansing of the Russian-speaking population, which caused within a short period of time already the lives of 5,000 civilians, as it was documented by a UN report. But apparently it was just the military arm of the politics of those years. So there's nothing and nobody who will persecute them for that. As of today, how many civilians are died in those regions? Who counts? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Now we'll turn to Ukraine. I know that there will be a lot said about this case, but I want to mention just a couple of examples. Let's recall certain Yaroslav Stetsko, who is considered to be the right hand of Stefan Bandera. In his autobiography written in 1941, he openly advocates for implementing German methods of extermination of Jewry, who he calls the main allies of Moscow, to Ukraine. And he was heard. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed in Ukraine by his followers, as we all know. Today, his boss Bandera, as Elizabeth mentioned, is considered a hero of Ukraine. And what about Stetsko? One might think that because of his words and other actions, he is condemned. No, to the contrary, he is glorified and worshipped in today's Ukraine. It's enough to run a simple search in the internet to find out that the street called after Stetsko exists in a number of cities. Interestingly enough, there is such a street in Bucha that has become a site of a famous hoax. Another example that I can't help mentioning, today I think we witnessed the state burial of the remains of Bandera's main rival in the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, Andrei Melnik, whose remains were exhumated in Luxembourg and brought to Ukraine. After Germany attacked USSR in 1941, he addressed Hitler and highlighted that Ukrainians wholeheartedly support his ideals of a new Europe, this is a quote, and lobbied the creation of Ukrainian military detachment to fight side to side with Wehrmacht on Eastern Front. I limit my remarks to this, and it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Kirill Shevchenko. Kirill, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you very much. As a modest historian, I'd like to raise several historical issues that, in my opinion, are of fundamental importance for understanding the current situation in the territory commonly referred to as Ukraine. And I'd like to draw attention to the fact, which is almost unknown now, that Ukrainian identity in its modern format is quite new phenomenon judging by historical standards. The thing is that until the early 20th century, the indigenous East Slavic population of Galicia or Galician Rus, which is now considered the main part of Western Ukraine, didn't have an Ukrainian identity in its current format and called themselves Rusins. Moreover, Galician Russian intelligentsia at that time considered the Russians of Galicia to be part of the triune Russian people consisting of Great Russians, Little Russians, and White Russians, that is, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians according to modern terminology. After the partition of Poland in 1772, Galicia became part of the Austrian Empire, and the enlightened and brilliantly well-educated Austrian bureaucracy, being fully aware of civilizational unity of Galician Russians and Russia, started to be increasingly concerned about potential pro-Russian irredentism on the part of the Russians. And particularly for this reason, the Austrian authorities launched a series of ethnocultural projects aimed at reformatting the traditional Russian identity of Galician Russians into an anti-Russian identity. Various methods of ethnocultural and ethnoconfessional engineering were used for this purpose, and I would like to emphasize that Ukrainian, so-called Ukrainian project in late 19th century became actually one of the methods of ethnocultural engineering aimed at transforming the traditional identity of the Russians, which considered themselves part of Russian people into an anti-Russian identity. However, despite this, until the early 20th century, the identity of the majority of Galician Russians remained basically Russian. A lot of politicians in early 20th century, including, for instance, Czech politician Karel Kramer, old Polish politician Roman Dmowski, and many others, they emphasized that the Ukrainian movement at the time played a role of anti-Slavic tool of Austrian policy at that time. The situation changed during the First World War when the Austro-Hungarian authorities, taking advantage of the extraordinary conditions during this war, began open terror and mass repressions against the Russians of Galicia and also Hungarian Rus. At that time, the Austro-Hungarian authorities established the first actual concentration camps in European history, specifically designed for Galician Russians, bearers of a Russian identity. The grim symbol of those repressions was the Austrian concentration camp of Talergov near Graz, established by the Austrian authorities in early September 1914, so right after the war started, where more than 30,000 Russians perished. These events actually constituted the first true genocide in European history, but Europe, contemporary Europe, refuses to acknowledge it. I would like also to say that the horrific scenes of the genocide of Russians by Austro-Hungarian authorities are brilliantly described by, for instance, Yaroslav Hašek in his famous novel The Wood Soldier Švejk, and also in the novel The Radetzky March by Galician native of Jewish origin Joseph Roth. I do recommend carefully reading these novels. They are extremely illustrative in this regard. And also, I would like to say that activists of the Ukrainian movement at that time played a shameful role, serving as informers on Galician Russians and also guards with often sadistic tendencies in Austrian concentration camps. Modern Galicia, now a symbol of Ukrainian nationalism, acquired a Ukrainian ethnocultural identity only after this genocide of the Galician Russians during the First World War. And the Ukrainian movement initially served as an instrument of the anti-Slavic and also anti-Russian policies of Austro-Hungary and later Germany. After the First World War, these tendencies intensified, and symbolically that Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists was founded in 1929 in Vienna. It was during this time that the ideology of Ukrainian Nazism took shape, and according to American historian John Armstrong, Ukrainian Nazism was a more primitive and at the same time more emotional and even more aggressive copy of German Nazism. In this connection, I would like to draw your attention to one very important book, collective monograph on the phenomenon of small Nazisms, which was published a few months ago by International Affairs Journal. This is this book. This is collective monograph on the phenomenon of this so-called small or junior Nazisms. Yes, and I do recommend this book, which is extremely useful for understanding the essence of this phenomenon of small or junior Nazisms, including, of course, Ukrainian Nazism. With Hitler's rise to power, the Ukrainian project became an instrument of Nazi policy in Central and Eastern Europe. And Ukrainian Nazis helped Hitler, for instance, liquidate first Czechoslovakia, then Poland, as well as exterminate significant portions of Jewish, Polish, and Russian population in Eastern Europe. And one of the bloodiest crimes, probably, of the Ukrainian Nazis was the Volyn massacre in spring and summer of 1943, when, according to some historians, more than 100,000 Polish civilians were murdered in Volyn region, in northern part of Western Ukraine. And I would like also to emphasize that the murder weapons used were mainly so-called bladed weapons, including knives, including axes, saws, hammers, and so on. 10 years ago, in 2016, the Polish Parliament, Polish Sejm, recognized this as a genocide against Polish people. But those who committed those crimes are now heroes in Ukraine, as my colleagues have mentioned already. And I would like also to say that repressions and terror against civilians can be described as, so to say, a visiting card of Ukrainian Nazism. And the most recent example of this is the attack on Pedagogical University in Staropolsk in Luhansk Republic, where 21 girls students were killed. And in conclusion, I would like to cite famous Polish politician and intellectual Roman Dmowski, who wrote in his article called The Ukrainian Question. By the way, this article was written in 1931, that if independent Ukraine were to emerge on European political map, it would inevitably fall under the control of a totally anti-national elite. It would be doomed to become a tool for the advancement of foreign interests and inevitably become a bloody wound on the body of Europe. This is direct quotation from this article. So as we can see now, this dire prediction made by Polish politician Roman Dmowski, made almost 100 years ago, has proven remarkably accurate. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to Kirill, and we will return to Ukraine later if there are other participants who want to share some thoughts and analysis with us. In general, I ask everyone who wants to take the floor to ask a question, whatever, to indicate this through the Zoom interface to our moderators, and we will try to return to you at the moment when it will be most logical to discuss this issue. Now, I propose to turn to Baltic small nazism or minor nazism, where the spread of this phenomenon is absolutely unbelievable and disgusting, and it is going on for decades already. I remember while I was working in New York, there was a big scandal in America when a well-known American journalist of Lithuanian origin, Silvia Foti, published a book called The Nazi's Granddaughter, How I Discovered My Grandfather Was a Nazi Criminal. Her grandfather's name was Jonas Noreika, and he was and still is a hero of Lithuania. There are undeniable proofs that he not only participated in mass murders of Jews in Lithuania, but was a key driver of this crime. And as a result, more than 200,000 Jews, or 95% of their total number, were slaughtered by the Nazis and their Lithuanian collaborators. Having said this, I want to give the floor to Natalia Selukina, who I hope will give us some additional insights on this phenomena in Lithuania. Natalia, you have the floor.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. It is a great honor for me to share with you the outcomes of these important matters which are of concern among the professional community and the international community all in all. For many years, I've been handling the matter of minor Nazism. We will not be able to cover all of them, but I will share with you the most blatant examples. Can you see my presentation on the screen?
Да, видно. Спасибо.
Yes, we can see your presentation. Thank you. So here are the results of the voting of the UN General Assembly in December 2024, the resolution on fighting against the glorification of Nazism. It showed that traditionally, countries who traditionally vote against this resolution, which were low profile for many years, in voting against resolutions against Nazism, prove that the US, Canada, and Western Baltic states show highly politicized approach after the 1941 and the occupation of the territory of the Soviet Lithuania, the German regiments and Nazi groupings conducted slaughters of Jews, Russians, Lithuanians, and other ethnic groups, including war hostages. It is known that on the 22nd June, the child camp was bombed and the village Blinga was burned together with all its residents. We know that many villages in the occupied territories followed the same destiny. The police battalions were established further on to commit such crimes. Further on, these battalions were sent to the occupied territories of the USSR, where they continued to commit war crimes. These facts are proven by various archive documents and international studies. In particular, we should mention that the promotion of false narratives in the Baltic states and in Lithuania in particular is underpinned by the lack of consolidated decisions. The judgments of against Nazi criminals are used to show collaborators as victims of the Soviet political regime, and they are glorified as heroes in the modern history. That is what we see in various social areas. Jonas Simashko is a bright example. You can see on the screen the results, namely the map of today's Pskov region. That is what proves us the destruction of various monuments by the hands of those who follow the orders of this criminal. During long proceedings in Vilnius and in October 1962, the facts was established of mass crimes and mass murders of 50,000 people. The victims were Soviet civilians. During these proceedings, the names of Nazi accomplices was established. But it is important because they managed to flee together with the Nazi army. They settled down in Germany, Canada, and the US and other states. The American justice, up until 1980, didn't undertake the appropriate measures and refused to extradite the individuals in violation of international agreements. At the same time, they continued hiding these individuals. They also were used as intelligence officials. intelligence officers. As of today, the process of glorification of Nazi accomplices in the Baltic states rests on the years of non-actions in the United States. For instance, recently an exhibition was organized of Jurgis Ordis. His photo you can see on the screen, but the organizers concealed the fact that during the Second World War, he commanded the punishment regiment and was engaged in murders of various Soviet soldiers and hostages. Even Lithuanian historians know that. In Lithuania, alternative versions of the Second World War history are written, the history is rewritten, revised, as well as the outcomes of the Second World War. In various manifestations, it also encompasses culture, education, and other social spheres. Which is of vital concern is that it touches the youth. At the international level, it is our duty to say that in promoting this narrative, it is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania that plays a fundamental role. Disfigured historic facts are legitimized. On the 1st of May 2023, Lithuania adopted the law on the prohibition of promoting totalitarian regimes and their ideology. Sometimes it is called the desovietization law. The Soviet occupation of Lithuania equals a Nazi occupation. That means that the equality of the Third Reich and the Soviet Union is now codified. A special commission was established to take out of social areas monuments dedicated to Soviet soldiers, Soviet commanders, those who were fighting Nazis. This is an example of the facts that resists the false narrative that I just showed you. Could you please show me the slide number 9? We see the ongoing fight against the memory of soldiers of the Red Army. This is a long-lasting fight. For instance, Václav Sobernatenas, the hero of the Soviet Union, Lithuanian cities and had streets named after him. But in May 2018, the last street named after the first Lithuanian hero of the Soviet Union was renamed. This is due to such a politicized approach to immortalizing names of heroes. But on my initiative, Russia dedicated a street to his name. That is what we do in order to maintain the memory of those who fought against the Nazi occupation. After the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine, the results of this disfigured historic memory became visible. Ukrainian forces and nationalist organizations in Ukraine are endorsed and supported by Lithuanians at large scale. Russian law enforcement agencies document the crimes committed by Lithuanian Nazis and prosecute the criminals. Here are some of the examples. Slide number 11, please. Here are some of the examples of the glorification of Nazi accomplices. That is how the effects of their rehabilitation are being established. We call upon experts and specialists from various states to pool their efforts in order to fight against the neo-Nazi groupings. Russia is committed to maintaining the historic truth. We are committed to bringing the message to the international level within historical and legal frameworks. Dear colleagues, thank you very much. I will be happy to take your questions.
Спасибо большое. Thank you very much, Natalia. This is indeed a big disgrace to see what is happening in European countries and how they try to brainwash their population, especially younger citizens of their countries, how history books are being rewritten, and of course, it results in the phenomena that you highlighted when people do not longer know who was the real criminal and who was the real hero. I now want to give the floor to Tanya Tolekovich. I hope she will give us some additional details on this topic. Please remain short in your remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Tanya Tuleković, Museum Advisor and Director in Memorial Donja Gradina, Republic of Srpska, and today I will speak about Donja Gradina as a response to historical revisionism. I hope I will be short. Historical revisionism and the re-emergence of Ustaša ideology in the contemporary social and political context has been particularly pronounced in the Republic of Croatia over the last 30 years. Ustaša symbols and greetings are once again being used in public spaces, as are different interpretations of the Jasenovac concentration camp and the number of victims. Some revisionists and associations are trying to portray the Jasenovac camp exclusively as a labor or collection camp, denying its character as a death camp. There is a constant challenge to historically established data on mass murders, especially in the Jasenovac concentration camp system, in an effort to reduce responsibility for the genocide committed against Serbs in the independent state of Croatia. The attitude towards historical figures from the period of the independent state of Croatia indicates a tendency towards their rehabilitation in certain social and political circles. The attitude towards Serbian cemeteries in Croatia, which are being destroyed, is also a function of historical revisionism. Individual cases of xenophobic vandalism at Orthodox cemeteries, the removal of Cyrillic plaques, the destructions of memorial plaques for the victims of the Ustaša camp Jadovno on Pag, as well as the desecration of a Jewish cemetery in Split. The institutional response to historical revisionism is a set of legal, educational, scientific, and cultural measures that state bodies, public institutions, and international organizations undertake to protect established historical facts and prevent politically motivated distortion of the past. On March 17, the National Assembly of the Republic Srpska adopted conclusions on amendments to the law on cemeteries, which would regulate the removal of monuments and symbols that promote and glorify the ideology of the independent state of Croatia and that offend the religious, moral, and national feelings of the Serbian people, and an amendment to the criminal code that would prescribe a new criminal offense that sanctions persons who publicly promote and glorify the Ustaša and the Ustaša ideology of the independent state of Croatia. The concentration camp Jasenovac was formed in August 1941 at the settlement called Jasenovac, at the exact site where before the Second World War had existed existed a company owned by the Serbian Orthodox family Bačić, which had consisted of several industrial plants such as a brickyard, a chain factory, a tannery, a sawmill. The properties of the Bačić family were confiscated upon the decision passed by the president of the government of the independent state of Croatia, and at that area on 125 hectares was built the Camp 3, the brickyard, which was the central concentration camp of the Jasenovac concentration camp complex, which was consisting of 5 concentration camps. Donja Gradina was included into the Jasenovac camp system in January 1942. Until the beginning of the Second World War, the village itself had been settled by the Serbian Orthodox people who, after the establishing of the independent state of Croatia and being exposed to the first Ustaš's attacks, partly escaped the area or were killed. The village area was left wasted, and since it was naturally well protected by the rivers Sava and Una, the Ustašas chose it as a mass liquidation site. Donja Gradina was turned into the largest liquidation center of the Jasenovac concentration camp, therefore confirmed the fact that the Ustašas' crime of genocide was systematically planned and carried out. At the panoramic shots of Donja Gradina, there can be seen the dimensions of the mass execution site and the features of the 9 grave fields with 105 mass graves of the total area of 10,130 square meters. The dimensions of the mass graves are as following. The length is between 15 and 50 meters, the height is between 3 and 4 meters, and the depth is between 1.5 and 2.5 meters. The layout and the dimensions of the mass graves actually present evidence of the fact that the mass liquidations were done by a plan and therefore confirm the fact that the Ustaš's crime of genocide was systematically planned and carried out. The memorial Donja Gradina in the Republic of Srpska, lasting memories of the victims of the Ustaš's crime of genocide, which was happening during the Second World War at this execution site in the Jasenovac concentration camp. It is a part of the immovable cultural property of exceptional importance for the Republic of Srpska. Until 1991, Donja Gradina was part of the Jasenovac memorial site, and with the breakup of the Socialistic Federative Republic Yugoslavia, the single Jasenovac memorial site was divided geographically and administratively into 2 independent institutions, the Jasenovac Memorial Site in the Republic of Croatia and the Donja Gradina Memorial Site in Republic of Srpska. In 2003, public institution Donja Gradina Memorial Site was established that has been taking care of the memorial, but has also been researching and presenting the Ustaša crime of genocide that took the place in the independent state of Croatia. Memorial Donja Gradina represents the most important institutional, scientific, and lasting response to historical revisionism when it comes to the genocide against Serbs, Jews, and Roma in the independent state of Croatia. As the largest execution site of the Jasenovac concentration camp, Donja Gradina, with its physical existence, mass graves, collected materials, and scientific facts, directly refutes all attempts to minimize, relativize, or erase Ustaša crime from historical memory. 700,000 victims were killed in the Jasenovac concentration camp system, 500,000 Serbs, 40,000 Roma, 33,000 Jews, and 127,000 anti-fascists, including 20,000 children. Converting this data into digital form makes it impossible to physically destroy or alter evidence. A massive database of digitized documents, statements by surviving camp inmates, photographs, and objects has been created. Organized visits by primary and secondary school students, as well as university students, are a key part of the strategy for preserving the truth among future generations. Projects such as the portrait.
Tanya, can I ask you to wind down a little bit because others want to take the floor as well? Sorry.
Okay, I'm at the end. Thank you.
Sorry for being so rude, and you said very many important things, at least those things that are not frequently pronounced here in Vienna at the OSCE. So thank you very much. And to finish with this topic, I would like to give the floor for short remarks for Mr. Alexander Pavic. Alexander, please unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, great. I'm a member of the Serbian parliament. I won't repeat what my predecessors, Tanya and Ivan, said regarding the history, but I would like to build on it, and specifically also on what Mr. Kirill Shevchenko said regarding the legacy of Austro-Hungarian ethno-engineering, which happened in Galicia, in today's Western Ukraine. It's amazing how similar, practically identical methods were used by Austria-Hungary in Bosnia and Herzegovina when Austria-Hungary occupied it and then annexed it illegally, as well as in the formation of Albania and Albanian language, pretty much, in the unification of an Albanian nation that practically didn't exist as a unified entity. And these were all geopolitical projects. What's interesting is that these projects had their continuity, especially during World War II. Those regions and the peoples that were subjected to Austro-Hungarian ethnic engineering were the most rabid Nazi followers, and that was the material that was used by Nazi Germany in the Balkans to build puppet states, such as the independent state of Croatia, which also encompassed not just today's Croatia, but also Bosnia and Herzegovina and today's northern Serbia, and also the formation of Greater Albania. What is relevant to today's situation and the situation in Europe over the past 30 years is that the breakup of Yugoslavia was preceded by an active promotion of World War II revisionism in Croatia, in parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and revival of together with the revival of a greater Albanian ideology among Albanians, not so much in Albania, but in the Kosovo province of Serbia. And precisely these extreme nationalists, pretty much revisionists and followers of neo-Nazi, let's say, revisionism, were the main allies of the West in the breakup of Yugoslavia. Furthermore, today, we have military alliances being formed in the region, in the Balkan region, specifically between Croatia, Albania, and the so-called Kosovo, which, of course, has not been recognized by Russia and the majority of the UN members, but was recognized by the majority of the NATO countries and the EU countries. And the alliance is very much similar to the alliance of Nazi puppet states during World War II. the first president of independent Croatia, post-communist, post-Yugoslav, was Franjo Tuđman, who was a historian whose specialty was World War II revisionism and the relativization of Nazi crimes. Well, he was welcomed in Western Europe, especially as a champion of democracy, which is very similar to what is happening with Ukrainian neo-Nazis or extreme nationalists today. So we see a pattern. And in fact, I would say that the building blocks of NATO expansion that started in the late 90s had their origin in World War II revisionism, which was very, very handy in cultivating anti-Russian sentiment, and in the Balkans anti-Serb sentiment, because Serbs are traditionally viewed as historical Russian allies, very close in religion, ethnically, and otherwise. So the way that Serbs were treated in the Balkans and the way that we were subjected to aggression by World War II revisionist forces is very similar to what is happening in Ukraine now. So this is not just a historical problem. This is a problem of war and peace, which is now threatening to throw Europe into war again. So the parallels are striking. It's not accidental. I will quote a book by the title of a book by an American historian, Richard Weaver. Ideas have consequences. It starts with ideas and it ends with acts, war crimes, and in the end, war itself. So this is a very, very relevant subject today, and battling World War revisionism is directly related to preventing a wider war in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for highlighting this relevance of today's discussion to what we have today. It's not a minor discussion among historians and specialists, because this phenomenon has a direct implication on what's happening today. You're absolutely right. Colleagues, we are now approaching the final part of our discussion. I will try to give the floor to everyone who wants to speak. There are a number of people who ask for this. But to finish this part, I'm honored to give the floor to Mr. Jeff Roberts, who will tell us about this phenomena in a different part of Europe, but which is very relevant today. Jeff, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Fine. Okay. Well, thanks very much for the invitation. I accepted the invitation because I share the concern with the politicization of the history of the Second World War and with the whitewashing of collaboration with the Nazis during the war. The one thing I would say is that if we're going to counter that historical revisionism, that distortion of historical memory, we have to do it on the basis of the whole truth about the war. And sometimes that truth, not all of it is, we may not want to recognize or accept. So, I mean, for example, my first book was published in 1989. And this is the cover of it, yeah? It's called The Unholy Alliance, Stalin's Pact with Hitler. And of course, its topic is the collaboration between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany in the period from 1939 to 1941. Okay, so the theme of my very brief contribution is this. It's state-level collaboration with Nazi Germany in Europe during the Second World War. And actually, it's a very simple, sweeping, well, a couple of very simple sweeping statements you can make about state-level collaboration with the Nazis in Europe during the Second World War. Firstly, that it was the norm. It was the rule, not the exception. The second generalization you can make that collaboration, state-level collaboration with Nazi Germany, only came to an end as a result of the defeat of Nazi Germany by the Soviet Union and its allies. Had Had the Hitler regime not been destroyed by the Red Army and the other Allied armies, that state collaboration would have continued right the way to the fruition of the whole Nazi project of a racist genocidal empire in Europe. Okay, so when Germany attacks the Soviet Union in 1941, it doesn't do so alone. It does so in alliance with Romania and with Finland. Subsequent to the attack, other countries join in the attack on the Soviet Union: Italy, Croatia, Slovakia, Hungary, and so on. Spain, fascist Spain, doesn't join the war directly. It remains neutral, but it sends the Blue Division to fight on the Soviet-German front. And in fact, every so-called neutral state in Europe during the war contributes in some significant way to the Nazi war on the Soviet Union. The one exception to that rule is Ireland. Yes, Ireland's neutral during the Second World War. And Ireland, of course, is in the Anglo-American Soviet sphere, so to speak. But even in the Irish case, at the end of the Second World War, in April 1945, when Hitler dies, the Irish leader, Eamon de Valera, he went to the residence of the German minister in Dublin and presented his condolences on behalf of the death of Germany's Führer. Now, to Finland, of all these collaborationist states with Nazi Germany during the war, the country that gets the best kind of like press, almost a kind of like free pass in relation to this collaboration, is Finland. When most people, maybe not in the part of the world that most of the speakers at this forum come from, think about Finland. It's not in relation to its collaboration with Nazi Germany. It's in relation to the war it fought with the Soviet Union in 1939 to 1940. So that's the predominant perception of Finland fighting the Soviets, not fighting alongside Nazi Germany. Now, of course, Finnish politicians and and Finnish historians, some Finnish historians anyway, have been very keen to kind of cultivate this picture of Finland during the war, which focuses on its war with the Soviets, right, rather than its collaboration with Nazi Germany. And they've also been very keen to separate the Finnish war against the Soviet Union from the German war against the Soviet Union. So they had this idea of the continuity war, and the continuity war is the continuation of the struggle against the Soviet Union in 1939-40 through to the continuing struggle against the Soviet Union after the launch of Operation Barbarossa. So they're very keen to make the argument that the Finnish war with the Soviet Union post Barbarossa, 1941 through 1944, is actually a separate war. It's very separate, but that's not actually true. There was extensive collaboration and coordination of Finnish involvement in Operation Barbarossa. Right, it was the Finns that closed the blockade of Leningrad in the autumn of 1941. There were German divisions on Finnish soil throughout the war. Germany was Finland's main supplier of armaments and other materials during the war. As late as June 1944, the then Finnish government promised the German government that Finland would not sign any separate peace treaty unless Germany agreed that it could. So thereby actually reaffirming, cementing, actually deepening the alliance between Finland and Germany as late as the summer of 1941. Now, okay, it's also true that 2 or 3 months later, the Finns back away from that position. A new government comes to power and they adopt a different position. But the only reason that Finland, and the same is true of all the other collaborationist states with Dr. General, actually changes its policy and agrees to seek peace to end its collaboration with Germany is because it's facing defeat. It's facing catastrophe. It's facing inevitably Soviet occupation of the whole of Finland if it doesn't do a peace deal. Okay, one last point. Okay, there's no evidence as far as I can see that Finland was in any way a kind of active participant in the Holocaust of European Jews, right? But at the same time, there are questions that the Finns need to ask in relation to its treatment of Soviet POWs, right? Of the 63,000 Soviet prisoners of war captured by the Finns during the first year of the war, and I'm talking about the continuation war, not the winter war, 1/3 of them die in captivity. Now, those figures aren't as high as the attrition rate of POWs captured by the Germans themselves, but still pretty high. So, and indicative that there are many questions that Finland needs to answer about its participation in the Second World War, specifically its alliance with Nazi Germany following the launch of Operation Barbarossa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I specifically invited you to this panel knowing that your views will be a little bit different from the mainstream of what people discussed, and we always welcome participants from other countries, provided they rely on facts. We welcome any position, any discussion. The problem is that our Western counterparts very often just shy away from this discussion or just try to avoid it. Well, you raised the topic of the run-up to the Second World War, and this was a very controversial period itself and still has a number of interpretations. You know that the Soviet Union was maybe the last country to seek peace with Hitler after the Soviet Union tried to create a common front against Hitler. And there are a number of books written about this, but this is a separate topic. I mean, we speak about collaborationists, and you're absolutely right to say that the Finns, unfortunately, whatever their political motivation was, committed a number of terrible crimes, and they now try to also whitewash many of those who were behind these crimes. And there is no justifications of any political positions, and the way you treat the prisoners of war, the way you organize concentration camps, the role in the blockade of Leningrad, it all has to be discovered. And I think that recently we have made very serious steps towards this direction. Anyway, thank you very much for participation. I now will give the floor to a number of participants who wanted to make short remarks. I try to accommodate everybody's wish, so please, colleagues, be very brief in your remarks. The first on my list is Mr. Gulbat Artshiladze. Gulbat, you have the floor. Looks like there are some technical difficulties. In the meantime, I will give the floor to Tomasz Pacek. Tomasz, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. It is a big honor for me to talk on this floor. I'm the chairman of the Slavic Committee, which is in the Slovakia Public Diplomacy NGO. And I prepared a small speech for this occasion. So I would like to say that today we face a dangerous paradox. As the generation that witnessed the horrors of the World War II leaves us, the collective memory of our people is becoming increasingly vulnerable. History is no longer just a subject of academic study. It has become a weapon. In Europe, we see a growing trend where historical facts are selectively ignored, distorted, or completely rewritten to serve current geopolitical agendas. As a result of this pervasive manipulation, many people have made or are making incorrect historical interpretations, just like you said about it. However, The most important step for every individual is indeed for every nation is to have the courage to admit their mistakes, correct their path, and truly learn from those mistakes. To counter this weaponization of information and history, we must support global citizen initiatives that protects the truth. In this regard, I would like to mention the Global Fact-Checking Network because their work is crucial. Platforms like that, like the GFCN, act as much needed shield that seeks to isolate deliberate fakes, expose coordinated disinformation campaigns, and restore objectivity in the global informational space. For Slovakia especially, preserving the objective truth about the World War II is essential for our national identity. Our complex history has given us a deep understanding of the tragic consequences that foreign manipulation and totalitarian pressures can bring to a nation. The true defining spirit of our people, I mean the Slovak, was manifested in August 1944 through the Slovak National Uprising. In this historic movement, our nation courageously stood up against the fascism. Slovakia was finally liberated thanks to the numerous sacrifices of the Red Army. And we in Slovakia continue to honor and protect this sacred monument of victory over fascism. Looking back at the Eastern Front, we must speak clearly about the nature of the Nazi occupation. It was not an ordinary military campaign, but also a systematic, planned genocide of Slavs and other ethnicities. Millions of Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Poles, and other Slavic peoples were targeted for deliberate extermination, forced labor, and complete subjugation to doctrines of racial superiority. Therefore, it is a matter of deep concern in Slovakia to witness the current revival of ideologies that we thought were buried forever at the Nuremberg Tribunal. In particular, we cannot remain silent about the state-sponsored propaganda of Stefan Bandera in today's Ukraine. This is a historical trauma for Slovakia, because after the end of the World War II, our country experienced the cruel reality of Banderites. I mean the armed units of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. In the late 1940s, these forces crossed the territory of Slovakia, leaving behind a trail of terror, robberies, and tragic murders of innocent Slovak citizens in our eastern regions. It is unacceptable for us to see individuals who were accomplices of Nazi punitive units and responsible for mass killings of ethnic minorities. Now they are glorified in Ukraine as national heroes. Naming streets and schools across Ukraine after figures like Stefan Bandera or Shukhevich, it is a betrayal of the very values on which post-war Europe was built. We must realize that when education systems are manipulated to teach young people to Russophobia, we are not building a stable Europe. We are sowing the seeds for future conflicts, as we see now in the Ukraine, for example. Some people have clearly not learned from those mistakes of the 20th century, and we can clearly see this in many top EU politicians. This modern betrayal of history requires accountability. According to Stefan Harabin, which is former Ministry of Justice of Slovak Republic, the way forward must include strict accountability after the current special military operation is over. We hope that Russia will establish something like a Nuremberg 2.0 task, which will be tasked with investigating and legally punishing all those who collaborated with Zelensky's regime in the dangerous policies, revisionism, and conflict escalation. Just as the original Nuremberg trials ended impunity, it is also needed to make a new legal framework for the responsible actors of this war. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for providing this ground.
Thank you very much. I will now attempt to bring to our discussion Mr. Gulbat Khiladze. Gulbat, please.
Здравствуйте, как слышите?
Hello, can you hear me?
Слышим хорошо,
We
спасибо.
can hear you well,
Спасибо,
thank you.
извините, что
Thank
не
you.
подключился
I'm
на
sorry,
некоторое
I
время.
was
Мне
offline
просто
for some time.
сообщили, что тут большую
I was told
шумиху подняли в русофобских средствах массовой
that the
информации,
Russophobic media
что
were
до вечера
raising
дня
noise
буквально мы с
and
коллегами
that
создали совет по мониторингу
me and my
русофобии
colleagues
в Грузии.
created
То есть
a
наблюдать за
council for
тем, как
monitoring Russophobia in
развивается рост
Georgia.
ненависти против
We are
России,
monitoring the
какие
development of the hate
законодательные
speech
акты
against Russia.
способствуют этому или
We're
не
monitoring
хватает
the
у нас
legal
законов,
acts
которые бы пресекали
and
русофобию в
lack of
Грузии.
acts that
И
would
вообще
cease
изучение
Russophobia
этого
in Georgia. We are studying
негативного
this
феномена.
phenomenon,
И вот
this
я
negative
переключился
phenomenon.
на некоторое время,
So I
чтобы
switched for some time
поговорить
to talk about
именно это.
that.
Ну вот я почему об этом тоже сказал,
I'm
мог и
talking
не
about this
рассказывать это, потому
for a
что
specific
вот
reason.
восхваление нацизма,
The
который
glorification of
имеет
Nazism
практически место быть
that
в нашей
essentially takes
практике во
place
многих
in
достаточно,
certain, or
к
rather
сожалению,
in many
обществах,
countries
уже
and
после
societies today, in
и
particular post-Soviet
посткоммунистических.
societies and post-communist
Естественно,
societies.
связано с
These
русофобией.
phenomena are closely linked to
Политической
Russophobia,
русофобией.
a
Я
political
сейчас не имею
Russophobia.
в виду бытовую
I'm
какую-то
not talking about
русофобию,
day-to-day
политическую,
Russophobia. This is
идеологическую
a
русофобию.
political
И
ideology and
это
policy.
повестка, которая успешно была
This
навязана
is the agenda which was
постсоветскому и
successfully imposed
постсоциалистическому пространству, кроме
on the
России
Soviet
и
and
Белоруссии.
post-Soviet territories, but for Russia and Belarus, perhaps.
Установка идеологически
This
уравняла
agenda
фашизм с коммунизмом. Гитлера со
made
Сталиным,
equal Hitler and
концлагеря с
Stalin,
ГУЛАГом.
fascism,
Вот.
and
Такая идеологическая
communism.
установка сделала возможным
This
уравнение
ideology
этих самых
made it possible
коллаборационистов
to
исторических
consider
патриотов и
collaborators
защитниками Отечества, Великой
and
Отечественной войны.
patriots and
Это
defenders as
оказалось выгодным
equals
в рамках
during the Second
многих
World War.
национальных, я бы сказал, и националистических
That was
проектов
beneficial within the new
посткоммунистических
nationalist
элит.
and
Но
neo-nationalist
уравнение
projects of the post-communist
коллаборационизма с
elites.
патриотизмом переросло в
But
открытое возвеличивание фашистской
it grew
идеологии,
into the glorification of
как коллеги
the
отметили, прибалтийских
Nazi
странах и,
ideology
само собой,
in the
на
Baltic
Украине.
states and
А поскольку
apparently in
Советского Союза
Ukraine.
больше нет, образ
There
врага
is no
легитимен,
Soviet
образ
Union. That
ситуации
is
и
why,
образ
in order
врага
to have an
вместе с тем
image of
кардинально
an enemy,
достался России.
it
И
was
все, что
Russia to
является
inherit
сегодня
this
антисоветским,
enemy image, and everything which
антикоммунистическим,
is anti-communist,
автоматически
anti-Soviet,
становится и является
automatically
антироссийским
becomes
и даже
anti-Russian,
антирусским в узкоэтническом смысле.
even ethnically
К
anti-Russian.
сожалению, нам приходится констатировать
Unfortunately,
исторические факты
we have
и во
to
многом объяснять элементарное. Вот
establish
мы
historical
говорим
facts
даже
and to
историки сейчас о
explain
каких-то
something
там
which
неизвестных,
seems
малоизвестных фактах, о посещении
natural.
каких-то
But we
явлений
discuss various
исторических, кто
facts
занимаются
and
историей,
historical events. That is what
уточнение
historians
каких-то
usually
данных,
do.
а
We have to
повторять
clarify
одно и
some
то же,
of the
что раз,
data,
другое, это
but we
очевидно.
keep
И
repeating the
приходится
same
это
basics.
доказывать вроде современному цивилизованному
And
сообществу,
we
особенно
have
западному.
to prove it to
Поэтому это
modern,
очень печально,
especially
и я бы
European
желал
modern
лично, как
citizens.
гражданин и человек
As a
свободной воли,
Georgian
чтобы вы
citizen,
не
as
просто
free
констатировали факты, а
activist,
искали бы какие-то
my wish
возможности,
is not
что
only
делать
to
дальше,
establish facts, but
как,
also to
какие
seek
рекомендации, может быть,
ways of
выдать
moving forwards.
власти имущим
Perhaps we should
в
negotiate on
наших странах.
recommendations
Ну, прежде всего,
to
Россия играет
bring
ключевую
to
роль,
our
она самое
authorities. But here,
влиятельное
Russia is
государство
to
на
play the
постсоветском
vital role with
пространстве, и хорошо, что
its
это так. И дай
stance
Бог, что
on the
Россия удвоила
international
свое
stage. It
влияние,
is a good
поскольку это
thing, and I
влияние,
hope
это
that Russia will
позиционирование,
only
это здравый
enhance
смысл
its
и разум
position
сегодня. И
because
все
this is the
люди на
position of
Западе,
common
нормальные
sense.
люди это чувствуют.
All
Просто их
adequate people
затыкают
in
и
the
силой
West feel
навязывают
it, but
абсурдные
unfortunately,
какие-то идеологии.
they are
Давайте я тоже
voiceless
несколько фактов
in these
основных
ideological
исторических
frames.
констатирую.
Если можно, только коротко, ладно? Буквально несколько фактов.
I kindly
Я,
ask you
несколько
to
фактов,
be
что
very brief.
обратим внимание на то, что
I will comment on a few facts. What about collaborators? We all heard about the army of Vlasov, but collaborationism was flourishing in the territories which did not belong to the Orthodox civilization, like West Ukraine or Baltic states. Traditionally and historically, they were more committed to the West. This is a historical fact, not to be forgotten. As for the Holocaust matter, last year, Russia declared the genocide of the Soviet people in its legislation. I welcome the language of these acts, namely the Soviet people. It is a good thing. Why? Because the concept of underhuman of German Nazi and their allies was mostly applied to Slavic peoples. The implementation of this content towards other races in its scale and its results has no difference with the hatred of Germans to Jews. The peoples of the Soviet Union were considered as a prey by Hitler, the prey to be exterminated to free the land for other peoples. And they succeeded. Over 26 million people perished during the Second World War. So I would say that this law that has just been adopted was to be adopted earlier. This is up to diplomats to explain to former peoples of the Soviet Union, to explain that this law is a good thing. We have to explain that we were not the aggressive force, we were defenders. We defended values. I will not take much of your time, so this brings to the end my presentation. I think that my main message is that we all have to work. Not only have to establish facts, but to do something.
Exactly what we are working on in the OSCE and in the UN, and this meeting is a very important stage of this work. Now I want to give the floor to Mr. Alexey Petrovich from Moldavia.
Добрый день, Дмитрий Алексеевич. Большое спасибо за
Good
приглашение.
afternoon. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you for the work that the Russian Federation has completed in defending the historical truth across all the international platforms. Coming back to the topic of our today's discussion, I would like to make an important comment. Moldovans are the only people of the former Soviet Union where during the Second World War, no self-sufficient collaboratist unit was created. That is the only people of the Soviet Union, and this is a source of pride for us. Over 600,000 people participated in the fight against Hitler. Most of them died, liberating European countries. Over 400,000 civilians died. 2 times the war was unfolded in our territory. Moldova was the first to face the attack by the Hitler's army. In school books, you will read that the Netanyahu army was to liberate our country from communism. This is the official stance of our authorities. That is what Moldovan school children are taught. Today, in the Baltic states, in Ukraine, and in other regions where neo-Nazism is flourishing, there used to be SS regiments, SS units, there is battalions. There is some kind of continuity, but in Moldova you won't find anything related to Hitler. No collaborators were found there. That is why the main objective of Moldovan curators or puppeteers is to build the anti-Russian Moldova. Russia is portrayed as an aggressor, and Roman occupants are portrayed as heroes, as liberators. I would say this is a shameful paradox. And they're very sad to have a memorial to the Chisinau ghetto where over 30,000 people were killed. And kilometer to the left, you will find a memorial to the Romanian soldiers. And 1 kilometer to the right, you will find another monument erected to the Romanian liberating soldiers. And all this happens in the city, which remembers killings committed by occupying powers. The policy is implemented at a large scale. New monuments are object to close monitoring by authorities. Very often the inauguration activities are coupled with various unrest. But recently, during the Victory Day, in Moldova, over 300,000 people went to street. To my mind, this is illustrative. You can see on one hand the official stance of the authorities, and on the other hand, you see people who celebrate the victory which was brought due to the sufferings of their grandfathers. In conclusion, let me say that today, Moldova is in the forefront of fighting for the historic memory, and I'm proud that Moldovans decently defend its memory in the most difficult circumstances. I thank the Embassy of the Russian Federation for your position, in particular in our country. I'm thankful for the way you defend the memory of the Russian Liberating Army, and I thank you for this agenda in general in our bilateral relations and in our shared history. Of course, it is a tough time for us in the embassy, but we're committed to working further on in defending our shared memory.
Trying to raise all these issues also in OSCE, in issues related to your country and to the situation there, including the glorification of criminals and troubled history of the Second World War. I think that's very important for everyone to consider facts and not assumptions. Next on my list is Mr. Mikhail Filaniotis from Cyprus. You have the floor, sir.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги,
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear participants of the round table. First and foremost, on behalf of the Friendship Society Cyprus Russia and on behalf of the Friends of Russia and Cyprus, I would like to express our condolences to the victims and family of the victims of the terrorist attack committed by the neo-Nazi regime in Stravinsk. We are shocked not only by the murder per se, but by the reaction, by the zero reaction from the EU. So we glorify the memory of those kids who died. The tragic incident on the 22nd of May, 1 month prior to the 85th anniversary of the Hitler's attack, those nationalists and collaborators have revived today in the modern Ukraine. Back then and today, their objectives remain the same. The strategic defeat of Russia, its balkanization, and I don't want even to think what would happen next. But as they failed in the 19th century with Napoleon, as they failed in the 20th century with Hitler, they will fail in the 21st. The lesson of the history has not been learned at all. At that time, they were called traitors and collaborators, but today they are called military puppets and Russophobic Western activists who are ready to fight to advance the UK, the US, and NATO values as long as the last Ukrainian survives. Suffices to listen to Kaja Kallas, the EU representative. This is a bright example of Russophobic sentiment. Collaborationism is not a sheer historic fact. This is a call to common sense. This is the lesson that we haven't learned. During the Second World War, we saw in Ukraine and in Baltic states forces came to Hitler to achieve their own objectives, but they chose the way which brought only suffering to their own people. We cannot turn a blind eye to the horrors of this choice. But involvement in repressions, persecution of civilians, destruction of communities, these are the pages of the history which cannot be wiped off. We are more concerned by the attempts to glorify and rehabilitate those who were involved in collaborationism. Both in Ukraine and in Baltic states, modern authorities and radical nationalist forces justify and glorify those collaborators, transforming them into national heroes. The bones of our ancestors keep cracking when Stepan Bandera, Shukevich, and others are glorified, as well as other traitors. This is not simply a history disfigured, but this is a dangerous play with foundations of the international security. This process is coupled by stronger Russophobic sentiments. This is some kind of revenge for the defeat of Nazism, for the victory of Russia in the Second World War. Russophobia has become a political tool which is employed to deviate the attention of the community away from domestic economic problems. This justification is also an attempt to revise history, to justify modern political interests and nationalist ambitions. The substitution of terms leads to balkanization and stronger extremism. I kindly ask you to be more brief and to come to the end of your presentation.
Пусть уроки коллаборационизма станут не просто страницами.
I wish that the lessons of collaborationism would become not a lesson, but a warning for the sake of future generations, for justice. It is our duty to remember this lesson.
Thank you very much for your support and very important words. And thank you for your condolences. We appreciate it very much. I would like to ask the last name on my list is Mr. Mikhail Chernov, maybe to sum up the discussion in a way. Mikhail, вам слово.
Thank you very much, dear excellencies, ambassadors, dear participants. First of all, I would like to thank the Russian mission to the OSCE for organizing this roundtable and all the participants of the event, especially those from the European Union countries and from the United Kingdom. In the current circumstances, it is a very brave act to participate in such event. I would like to share with several thoughts. First, collaboration with the Nazis during the Second World War is generally acceptable in most European Union states and in the countries that have decided to link their fate with Europe. It can be said that it is their learned lesson, a choice, a conscious inheritance of the united Europe of the Nazis, which attacked the Soviet Union, and of today's Europe, which is preparing to wage a war against Russia, and openly they say so. German politicians, German officials, representatives of the German armed forces, they are telling us that they are preparing to war with the Russian Federation. Second, the European position is not only just words. It is not limited to words. There is an accelerated militarization of Germany and the entire European Union. The creation of a mobilization-based war economy in the European Union and the formation of large-scale forces
Looks like we're having some technical glitch and Mikhail is not available for now. Let's wait for him to reconnect, and in the meantime, I would like to give the floor. Mikhail, you're back. We didn't hear what you said. Okay.
That's why
we missed 1 minute of your last statement.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, as I said that the European leaders are ready to war with Russia and openly are talking about it. And the second point of my speech is that the European position is not limited to words. There is an accelerated militarization of Germany and the entire European Union, the creation of a mobilization-based war economy in the EU, and the formation of large-scale forces specifically designed for a major ground operation. German industry is actively working on joint missile projects with France, while the best German car factories, the pride of its civilian economy, are being repurposed for military production. This means that Europeans will need new collaborators. That is why current collaborators are declared heroes, the collaborators of the Second World War. And they serve as the role models for the new ones to come. Third, the dehumanization of Russian citizens leads to the justification of war crimes and genocide against the peoples of Russia, not only as collateral civilian casualties, but as deliberate extermination. This was the essence of the Holocaust, the destruction of the Jews. The genocide was planned and carried out against the Soviet people as well. Millions of civilians were killed, entire villages were burned with their inhabitants, people were exterminated in concentration camps, and Leningrad was deliberately starved to death. The Nazis planned to continue this policy after the war through artificial famine, mass starvation, and restriction of access to education for a surviving Slavic population. Fourth, the Russian Federation has adopted a law on the genocide of the Soviet people, which criminalizes the denial of this crime. This means that those who violate this law and deny the deliberate extermination of the Soviet people will go to jail. The date chosen for the Day of Remembrance of the genocide of the Soviet people, April 24th, is not accidental. On this day in 1943, the first decisions were made to prosecute Nazis and their collaborators among Soviet citizens. And the military counterintelligence, SMERSH, Death to Spies, was created also on the same day. Fifth, and the last. The adoption of this law means that in the future, Germany and the Europeans will inevitably have to pay for the genocide of the Soviet people and pay for a long time within the framework of relevant international procedures. Those guilty of denying the genocide will be subject to criminal prosecutions and will go to jail. The genocide and genocidal intentions will not remain unpunished. Current European politicians, military leaders, and public figures should clearly be aware of this and clearly understand it. They will have to pay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. Now I want to give the floor to my colleague Maria Zabolotskaya for some finishing remarks to sum up our discussion. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dmitry, for giving me the floor. And I just was very inspired by all the speakers who were talking about different important things. And I wanted to make short remarks on what actually Russian diplomats are doing to, in practice, counter these narratives and to bring Nazis to justice, so to say. So first of all, I'm an agent in the International Court of Justice, and that's why I want to draw attention of the audience to the proceedings in the International Court of Justice on the case which is called allegations of genocide under the 1948 Convention of Genocide. That case was filed by Ukraine against Russia, but there was an important development there. Russia filed counterclaims, and those counterclaims were actually accepted by the court for consideration. And these counterclaims will be covering the genocidal policies of Ukraine in Donbass. And actually, this contemporary situation is addressed in a perspective showing actually the genesis of the Nazi ideology in Ukraine, starting from the beginning of the 20th century through collaboration movements until the present day. So all the files are already in the court, so I'm just alerting everyone, please follow the proceedings. It will be very interesting. And the second part is that regarding Baltic states, we are currently in exchange of diplomatic notes under the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, where we are actually alleging violation of that convention. And as part of those violations is actually the fight against memorials to Soviet soldiers, its glorification of Nazis, and all these policies of revival of Nazi ideology. And those exchanges of diplomatic notes is actually the first step of taking those countries to the International Court of Justice. So basically, there is a huge work underway. And the court will, so there will be a day in court regarding those steps that are currently taken by those countries. They will not go unpunished. And then, of course, I would call on all the participants. I'm sure they're very active people and they're writing a lot in the internet to post as much articles on this topic as possible, because the problem is that if you Google any of the issues that we are discussing right now, including the resolution that we are putting forward on combating glorification of Nazism, what you will receive from the artificial intelligence tool of the Google is those are controversial initiatives of the Russian Federation, and then goes the narrative that we are trying to combat. And then if you want to actually find the actual text of the resolution, or maybe some views in support of that text, it takes you to go to third page of the Google, which of course not every person would do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, also for raising this artificial intelligence thing. You know, I recently tried to run a Google search on Ukrainian nationalism and asked several questions, and the artificial intelligence claimed that I am very biased, that I ask questions in accordance with the Russian position. So already it discouraged me from continuing to do this search. So you're absolutely right. The artificial intelligence is also being modeled in the way to shape the way of thinking of those who run these researches, and this is very serious. Thank you very much, and I would like to say that there were also journalists participating in our discussion, and I received two questions. I want to briefly answer them from RIA Novosti. So the first one: why, in your opinion, has it become possible in Europe today to publicly justify figures who were previously considered unacceptable? I believe it's a part of political agenda, and it's very deplorable because history is being used as a political tool, and we see it also as a big effort to justify Russophobia, to demonize Russia, to base it on false historic claims. That's why the discussion on the facts, not about the interpretation of the facts, but the discussion on facts is very important, and I believe that our discussion today contributed a lot to this thing. The second question was, do you think the international community can develop a unified approach to assessing Nazi collaborators? If so, how? My opinion is that's the only way forward if we want to return to normal, good neighborly relations in Europe. You know that one of the aims of our special military operation is denazification, and one can interpret it in a broader way to eliminate this distorted and perverted version of history, heroization of Nazi criminals. I believe that it's not only in the interests of Russia, it's in the interests of Europe as such. When we have discussions with our colleagues, we say that if you share the values of Ukrainian nationalism, of Ukraine making criminals heroes, then we understand that this is your value too. And for us, it's very telling in order to build future relationship with our European neighbors, to understand how they view history, how they view Russia. And that's why I think that's inevitable, that we have to come to a certain common page on these issues. And I think that historians are most welcome from different specters of opinion to bring about facts, to bring about truth about historic events that would help us to move forward, to navigate without this kind of landmines. And I would like to thank everyone who contributed to today's discussion. I'm sorry we were a little bit longer than I predicted, but everyone wanted to speak, and I really wanted to avoid situation where somebody would be offended by me not giving the floor to them. We discussed collaborationism today, and I want to say that it's not, we're not against discussing it in a historic context, in a historic way, for a normal historic discussion about the reasons of this or that phenomenon, because this is not something that happened only in Europe. I think our Georgian guest mentioned that there was also a collaborationism in the Soviet Union. There were Vlasovs, there were Russian Liberation Army. This is not a secret, and nobody conceals it. But there is a big difference. We do not name streets and schools in the names of those who were collaborating with Hitler. We do not try to make them heroes. We are very open about our history, but we don't want it to substitute historic truth. And that's a big difference between my country and Ukraine and Baltic states and some of the examples that were mentioned today. So I think that we need to spend more time finding out historic facts. Of course, we live in a post-truth world, and sometimes you can say hundreds of times about some fact, and if another part, in another side doesn't want to notice it, it will not. But we need to be very insistent because this is it's our future that is at stake. It's the future of European continent. It's the future of the whole world, because it can be affected by these historic differences at first glance, but they are not historic. They are political. We see that this topic was briefly touched today. I'm very grateful to you because you showed different perspectives from different regions. Of course, one could have concentrated more on Ukraine, and there are more things to say about Ukraine, about Baltic states, but I wanted to give the wide overview of how it is being viewed in the different parts of the world. That's why I think that we achieved the goal of our discussion. We will think about continuation, and I also would like to inform you that we will share the recording of this discussion in two languages, in Russian and English, a little bit later. We will also circulate a summary of this discussion for our colleagues on OSCE, who I'm absolutely sure are watching our discussion, but they don't want to be identified sometimes, but we know that they are there. So we will try to make your efforts resonate and be visible. And thank you very much for participation. I wish all of you a good afternoon or good evening, depending on what time zone you live in. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ребята, переводчики, отзовитесь.
Мы здесь, мы здесь, мы здесь.
Да, переводчики, спасибо вам огромное. Извините, что мы задержались, что мы немножко вышли за флажки. Очень ценим вашу помощь, надеемся на нее в дальнейшем. Без вас мы бы не справились. Поэтому спасибо вам большое, спасибо вашим руководителям за то, что пошли навстречу. Давайте вместе продолжать. Спасибо еще раз.